It is edible. You can eat it. It's not plastic. So there's a lot of fruit here. I don't see too many people eating it. Maybe you thought you couldn't, or you'd break a tooth finding out. What's that? Okay, thank you. We have one person that experimented already, so he verified it. So unless it's just some illusion, we're all in the matrix. It is real. And just to let you know that the next speaker, Liz Heywood, she will have a question and answer period at the end of her speech. So when she does give that, we'll have a little bit of time so you guys can think of some questions. I'll be coming around with a mic. And that's it. So let me welcome up David Schaefer. He's from the Humanist Association of Connecticut, and he will be introducing Liz Heywood. David Schaefer.
Good morning. I'm here to introduce Liz Heywood, and first I'm here to tell you a few things about the Humanist Association of Connecticut. Let's get this right. My wife June is supposed to be here, but she's not feeling well this morning, and I urged her to stay home. But she sends her greetings. She's the current president of the Humanist Association of Connecticut and one of the co-founders, along with me, back in 1989, 24 years ago. And this is a very exciting session, and she hates to miss it, and I'm sorry she's not here. And I will have to leave shortly after my talk as well. This is a very auspicious occasion, as we know, because we finally got together after all these years, and I hope this is the first of many happy meetings such as this. This is also an auspicious occasion. We have the blessing of the universe. As you may have noticed, last night was not only a full moon, it was a lunar eclipse, which has to be an omen for good. Now, the origins of this organization that I represent, the Humanist Association of Connecticut, may be of some interest. Back in, some of you perhaps weren't even born in 1989, but it was an interesting period in our history. In 1986, January the 1st, a book came out that was one of the stimuli for our founding the Humanist Association. It was Dr. Bernie S. Siegel, a supposed pediatric surgeon, Love, Medicine, and Miracles. And this was a very popular book then. I guess maybe in some quarters it still is. But it aroused some interest in Bernie Siegel as a healer. And I was present at a Unitarian meeting. I'm a lifelong Unitarian, practically. And one of my friends, immediately after Bernie Siegel had preached about, from the pulpit on love, medicine, and miracles, was approached by a young woman who said, well, I am so happy I heard this sermon because I have cancer and I now realize that I don't have to have therapy. A miracle will be enough. And some of us who heard that story and know that it was a true incident were so offended that we thought we needed to do something. It took us a little while longer, however. That was in January '86. And in Sunday, August the 16th of 1987, next year, was another interesting event. It was the, how many of you remember the harmonic convergence? Well, you see, there are a few of us here who remember the harmonic convergence. It was a thing where everyone in the world was supposed to hold hands and hum, and then peace would arrive. And it didn't work for some reason. And it then suddenly acquired the slang name. Harmonic convergence was known as the Hummer Bummer. Anyway, it took us a little bit longer, but we finally decided we had to do something. So 4 of us contacted the American Humanist Association, and they provided us with a speaker, a wonder boy from Washington, whose name some of you know, Fred Edwards. And he came to Hamden and brought together an audience of somewhere between 50 and 100. I don't remember the exact count anymore, but got us all excited, and we formed the Humanist Association of Connecticut. At that time, there were a couple of other organizations, but they've, and therefore the suggestion was, and we followed it, that we call ourselves the Humanist Association of Central Connecticut, which we did. But sometime later, those other Humanist Association affiliates passed us away, and we just were asked to change our name to the Humanist Association of Connecticut, which we did. And that's the way it's been up to this time. Now, what are we doing? I think I'd like to tell you just a few of the major activities that we carry out. Every third Monday of every month, the third Monday of every month, we have a membership meeting. And we meet in Hamden at the Unitarian Society of New Haven in Hamden, which is on 700 Hartford Turnpike. Our speaker this coming Monday, which is the third Monday, is here today. He's Doug Peary. Doug, will you stand up, please? Doug, some of you know Doug for his books. He's got 2 of them now called Humanist Heroes. He's been one of our standby speakers for many years now. Was president for a while and has been vice president for a while. And this week he's going to be talking about Felix Adler, the founder of ethical culture, as one of the humanist heroes. Next month, November 18th, we're going to have a talk by Paul Chiariello, who is one of the Yale humanist community founders, a brand new group at Yale. They've had an undergraduate group for many years, but now they've organized, we have organized, because I'm also on the board of that, a Yale humanist community for the entire faculty and graduate program. The leader of this group is going to be Chris Stedman, who some of you know of, who's written the book Fatheist. He is an atheist and likes to work in cooperation with people of other faiths. And Chris will be coming down part-time during this year, and next year he will be full-time as the leader of this group, coordinator. He's currently with Greg Epstein at Harvard as the assistant chaplain, humanist chaplain at Harvard. And then we have some extra activities, such as a number of social justice activities throughout the hiking, for example, for the walkathons, for fundraising, and helping the poor in the New Haven area. And we have frequent dinners. Every month we've been meeting down the street at the Turkish Kebab House in West Haven. So there's plenty to do. I think I've said everything I need to say at this point, so I would like now to turn to my more immediate pleasant task. Liz Heywood is here, and you read in your program something about her past, and she is another person who has had experience with medical advice to pray or to other activities that turned out to be disastrous. And she, I think, will tell the story very effectively. If you haven't seen her website, I urge you to go to it because it's very moving. And now it's a pleasure to ask you all to welcome Liz Heywood as our next speaker. Thank you.
Yes. Can you hear me okay? I had to talk right into it, I guess. Can you see me? That's the next thing. I'm vertically challenged. Okay. I'm Liz Heywood, and I'm an atheist. I didn't start out as one. And I'm going to talk to you about the mindset of indoctrination that would trust a child's life to faith rather than medicine. It cost me my left knee when I was a kid, and eventually the amputation of my whole leg. Blind faith was the cause. I guess you could say that uncertainty was the cure. And at this point, I'm a firm believer in uncertainty. My prosthetic leg is the visible souvenir of my childhood medical neglect, religious overdose. But to think that I or someone else had it harder or easier, better or worse, divides us and marginalizes our personal experiences. I have a symptom. I'm a symptom bearer, but there are so many of us walking around with really deep wounds and scars from religious shaming and other abuse. Emotional trauma leaves deep mental scars even on able-bodied survivors. It doesn't matter whether the child's trust is broken accidentally or on purpose, emotionally, physically, sexually, or medically. Emotional overload causes damage. My story is just part of this effort to educate society about religious extremism in this country. No child should be put in a position where she's asked to endure something unreasonable, let alone painful, in the name of faith. However, most states still allow this treatment by law. I'm having trouble with this mic. How's that? Is that better? Okay. Religious faith becomes dangerous to kids when belief is treated as though it can cure physical conditions, and when faith in religion replaces reasonable medical steps that would alleviate pain or suffering. My childhood overdose of faith happened in Christian Science, the First Church of Christ Scientists, which was founded in Boston, Massachusetts by Mary Baker Eddy in the late 1800s. She believed that God's perfect spiritual universe is eternal and the physical world is a mortal dream. She stated that human bodies are illusions of false human consciousness, and we can choose to suffer, or we can lift our thoughts into a higher state, like waking from a dream. She said this was the science behind the way Jesus healed. She believed that Jesus commanded everyone to heal this way. Christian Scientists are some of the nicest people you'll ever meet. They don't believe in smoking, drinking, premarital sex. They're kind, usually educated, middle or upper class professionals. The newspaper, the Christian Science Monitor, reinforces this respectable reputation. Christian Science teaches the need for absolute faith. This is the quality that supposedly let Jesus feed multitudes with a few loaves and fishes, walk on the water, and heal the sick and the maimed, which would be really cool. I would be right at the front of that line if that was possible. Mary Baker Eddy also felt that absolute faith was critical to healing and expressing our perfect individuality as God's children. And she also demanded physical healings must be known by its effects on the body as well as the mind. And she believed that she had a science. I was the third generation of Christian Scientists on both sides of my extended family. Most of us lived close together, 20 miles from the Mother Church in Boston. This was our lifestyle for 3 generations. We studied Mary Baker Eddy's textbook, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, and the Bible every day. We went to church or Sunday school and to Wednesday evening testimony meetings to share testimonies of healing because we were supposed to practice what we preached. We were supposed to put this into effect every day. Christian Science treats all human difficulties, from illness to injuries to disagreement to fear, as mistakes of human perception to be solved like math equations. Physical health is believed to be based on a personal commitment to studying the writings of Mary Baker Eddy and the Bible and trying to live the right way by thinking the right way. We accepted this responsibility to monitor our own thoughts, beginning early in childhood. Christian Scientists believe the parents' thoughts influence the youngest children's health and behavior, and then your own responsibility as a kid increases. At 12, kids can join the Mother Church in Boston because that was the age when Jesus went into the temple. By then, an adolescent is expected to assume more responsibility for their own thoughts, and so for their own health. As a child, I was aware of my responsibility to stay healthy by policing my thoughts and avoiding images of disease or vice. My church demanded that I separate myself from human beliefs, not physically separated, but to think better. Separate myself from the lies of danger, disease, accidents, and even easy mortal solutions like taking an aspirin. I was under pressure to defend myself against these lies because they could tempt me to believe that discord was real. So when I ended up bedridden at 14 with a raging infection in my leg, I thought it was my own fault. I never swallowed a vitamin or an aspirin or an antibiotic. If I was sick or hurt, my parents called a Christian Science practitioner to pray for me, not to ask God to heal me, but to help create a mental environment receptive to the spiritual truth that would solve my human sense of pain and discord. Christian Science prayer is solitary. There are no prayer circles or gathering at somebody's house. It's very private. You pray, you study the Bible and science and health, usually silently, maybe in the same room as somebody else, but all very quietly and to yourself, sometimes in separate rooms. If my parents called a Christian Science practitioner, I usually spoke to him or her on the telephone. Prayer is believed to be so powerful that you don't need any laying on of hands. And it's all mental anyway, so you can do it through a phone call, and I guess now they do it through the interwebs. Faith healing requires a child to pray for or visualize something in direct opposition to what their senses are telling them. It abandons them to hurt, whether from a headache, a sprained ankle, or a bone disease. It asks them to trust with no proof. And it lets them believe if they don't get better, it's their own fault. And I don't care what you tell a kid, that's what they think. This approach provides no practical skills to cope with the adult world. The healings I had, that I believed I had as a kid, were of an earache, chickenpox, German measles, getting kicked in the face by the white pony, a black eye when I fell off my horse head first, and a punctured sole when I stepped on a rake barefoot. We called the practitioner and prayed, and I got better. So prayer worked. I went to public school, and in 4th grade, my class found out I went to the church where they don't go to doctors, and I was interrogated. What if you broke your leg? What if you were knocked out? What if you were bleeding to death? Would you go to the hospital then? This was terrifying to me because doctors and hospitals were so alien. And if I chose medicine or somebody chose it for me, it meant that I was rejecting perfection. It meant it was worse than anything I could think of. But I think what my friends really wanted to know, now I can look back, at the time I didn't know, but I think what they wanted to know was what would it take for me to stop believing that I was better than mortal, better than human, or better than they were. A cornerstone Christian Science healing in my family was my aunt's apparent healing of polio when she was 6 during World War II. My grandmother had been new to Christian Science at the time, and when her daughter contracted polio, she called a practitioner to help her pray. The fever passed, but my 6-year-old aunt was left with a leg that was completely useless, paralyzed. She could only hop on the other leg. My grandmother told me this story herself quite a few times. One night, her girls, including my aunt, were doing the dishes. My grandmother was praying in the next room. And then she heard a shout, "I can walk on my leg, I can walk." And her leg was okay. That fast. The next day, the little girl roller skated up and down the road, and the day after that, they walked all around the state fair. No leg braces, no after effects. This was part of my family's proof that Christian Science worked. I'm going to come back to this story later. One of the hardest points to explain about my ordeal is that my parents loved me. They weren't monsters. They were indoctrinated. They were brainwashed as children, just as I was. They heard these stories, and they grew up with this. This was our family's lifestyle for 3 generations. It doesn't excuse the choices they made, but it does help explain them. They were raised not with routine medical care, but with stories of these miraculous healings and calling practitioners. And they did what they did because they loved me, which makes my story even more upsetting. On a Saturday in November in 1975, when I was 13, I rode my horse, Flicka, same one I fell off on my head more times than once. I biked to my friend's house. We ran in the woods. It was a perfect, ordinary day. It was the best day it could have been. It included all of who I was, and it was the last day I ever ran. That night, as I watched TV with my family, my left knee swelled and grew painful, inflamed, and stiff. 6 weeks later, it erupted into so many sores, draining pus, so much pus that my mother put cookie sheets underneath. And within a month, I was bedridden for almost a whole year. I never saw a doctor. In 1974, the year before, the Christian Science Church had persuaded the Nixon administration to require states to pass religious exemptions to child neglect laws. This is the religious exemption in the current New York State law, felony child endangerment law. It is an affirmative defense that the defendant is a parent, guardian, or other, and is a member or adherent of an organized church or religious group which prescribe prayer as the principal treatment for illness and treated or caused such ill child to be treated in accordance with such tenets. The Massachusetts law in 1975 was similar. So because I was having spiritual treatment rather than medical, it could not be assumed automatically that I was being neglected. Mary Baker Eddy was also a big fan of what she called radical reliance. There was a strict Christian Science policy that prayer should not be mixed with medicine. They didn't want to pray at your bedside in the hospital. Because disease was supposed to be unreal, you couldn't pray, you couldn't accept that it was real in a hospital and then disbelieve the whole disease and therefore have a healing. My parents truly believed that only Christian Science prayer would save me, even as I got worse and worse. They thought I would die if I was taken to a hospital. The legal exemption combined with the respectable reputation of our church created this hands-off attitude, and this is political correctness, that kept anyone from investigating my case thoroughly. I was in too much pain to get out of bed the year I was 14. I couldn't lower my leg without all my sores starting to bleed. My friends were running on the 8th grade track team, riding horses, and starting to date, and I was praying for my life. Every day that year that I was bedridden, my mother changed my bandages. She helped me with the bedpan and washed my long hair in a basin. When my hair grew too matted to brush, she cut it off. I lived for the time she brought my horse Flicka outside the window. I spoke to my Christian Science practitioner in person or on the phone every day. He radiated confidence and serenity, even as I lost weight, had chills and fevers, and began to hallucinate. I never saw him express any doubt or uncertainty. He told me I would be healed, maybe instantaneously, like my aunt, in a moment of understanding that I was God's perfect image and likeness. But my pain never stopped, and I began to think that I was the weak link in the healing. To show fear by crying was to discredit God, so I would never cry in front of the practitioner, but when he wasn't there, I cried, I screamed, I sobbed, and finally I just wanted to die, but I was powerless to kill myself. The disease ran its course. I didn't die. After 10 months in bed, I spent 6 months in a wheelchair and a year and a half on crutches. My knee stayed rigid, and my leg closed up with a mass of puckered scars, but I was able to go to school after missing 2 grades, and I could ride my horse. So without ever talking about it, my family and I agreed this was the healing. Except I'd been told my healing would be perfect, and my knee didn't work. So underneath, I knew I had failed. At 16, I hated myself. I hated my body and my limp. I hated that I had lost my athleticism. I starved myself for days at a time and then binged. I think I wanted to control my body. I was moody, depressed. Sometimes I was suicidal. This is my junior picture in high school. You can contrast this with the girl on the horse from 3 years before. No one at school asked for any details because they knew the treatment I'd had was protected and legal. Hands off. When I was a teenager, I couldn't begin to consider that my parents had neglected me, that they might have watched me die. And I couldn't reject the religious face that still dangled in front of me this possibility of a perfect healing. At that point, my sanity depended on believing the myth. And I was terrified of medicine. I couldn't imagine any answers outside of Christian Science, only shame, blame, and surgery. I was sure doctors would insist on trying to fix me and only make me worse. I'd lose all my mobility that I'd gained, and I'd be back in the room, in bed, in pain. My practitioner used my case as an example of a child successfully treated with Christian Science prayer in an address he gave to other practitioners. We had our story straight, and we stuck to it. Living with this false certainty that I had been healed required a lot of mental contortion, because whatever I did, my legs stayed bent. It was a pretty useful position. I could do a lot of things. And I was claiming I'd had a healing, and I was still hoping for a perfect healing. I studied the Bible in Science and Health, went to church, gave testimonies about how grateful I was. I also quit high school. I couldn't hold a steady job, and I married the first man I dated, who wasn't religious but also came from a controlling, shame-based family. I kept my scars hidden, but I couldn't hide my staggering limp. I tried to wear myself out physically. I was a riding instructor, married a dairy farmer, exercised, raced horses, and I could sleep at night. But people would still ask, "What happened to your leg?" And I'd say, "Nothing, I just have a stiff knee." Actually, it had fused solid. And years later, an orthopedic specialist said that my knee was unique to North America. I really like that title. They don't see those kinds of fusions since before the discovery of antibiotics. It was a very third world healing that I had. When I was alone, I wasn't aware of my limp, but in public, I cringed when anyone stared. I felt branded with failure because the fault was in me, not in God or my church or my practitioner or my parents. But I had faith in a perfect healing because it was going to erase everything that I'd been through already like a bad debt forgiven. Because if I couldn't be healed, it meant everything I had already been through had been wasted. It meant my parents had orchestrated a nightmare that cost me my leg and my sanity, all for some 19th century woman's delusions about faith healing. I never let anyone except immediate family see the scars on my leg without an ace bandage. But then everything changed. My first doubts about my beliefs surfaced after I gave birth to my daughter Corey in 1990 when I was 28. I still considered myself a very serious Christian Scientist, but suddenly I was a parent. And I made a very conscious decision that I would abandon Christian Science if Corey's life were ever in danger, because this healing that I had been claiming all those years was not acceptable for my child. It took several years, but I left my marriage and Christian Science. When Corey had an ear infection, I took her to the doctor for antibiotics, and I stumbled through it, went to the pharmacy, and I thought, this is what parents are supposed to do. They ask questions. They find a way to stop their child's pain. They keep looking until something works. I didn't plan on needing psychotherapy. I thought I was okay. But leaving Christian Science made my whole understanding of reality crumble. I didn't know how to think. I was in my early 30s, and I thought I was losing my mind. My mood swings, panic attacks, constant anxiety, and shame tore my life to shreds. I couldn't function. I couldn't work well. Sometimes I couldn't function at all. It was the most frightening thing that I've ever been through. I thought I was insane. My therapist and psychiatrist didn't think I was crazy. They diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD is the after effect of feeling powerlessness in a life-threatening situation. The triggers can be as subtle as a word or a gesture and send you right into full-blown panic. It's called a mental illness, but it shows up on brain scans, which was also comforting to me because I wasn't crazy. My PTSD has responded to many years of the combination of antidepressants and therapy, but it's never left me completely, and it never will. In my life, it manifests as this crushing, paralyzing sense that nothing I can do will be good enough, the feeling that this is the last day, and feeling so pressured by even casual deadlines that it's hard for me to keep a normal work or school schedule. I'm terrible at keeping a steady job, and I have not been able to keep a long-term relationship. PTSD makes me immediately default to the worst-case scenario. There's not a lot of moderation in the way I view life. It makes me a lot like a prey animal, like a rabbit or a deer or a horse, with reflexes that instantly want me to fight or flee, usually flee. On the good days, it makes life very precious. On the bad days, it still makes me want to despair. It's forced me to wrestle with my past way more than I ever wanted to, that toxic, absolute faith. And what I found that's comforting is doubt and uncertainty. I spent 16 years in therapy, individual, couples counseling, group therapy, pretty much graduated from therapy. Religion starts with the premise we're sinful, damaged, misguided mortals in need of forgiveness, fixing, and repentance, and we might be beyond all hope. Therapy starts with the premise that we're human, and there are reasons, nature, nurture, or both, for what we do. There are many possibilities for treatment, and you don't have to be alone. I began to understand that I didn't have to know things. I could admit my uncertainty and learn. I didn't have to be defensive. The first time my leg was x-rayed and examined by a specialist was in 1995, 20 years after the original disease. I was 33. I was so terrified, I almost blacked out in the waiting room. I felt like I was defecting. The doctor said I'd had osteomyelitis, a bone infection caused by strep bacteria, which is treated in its early stages with antibiotics. Untreated, the disease had destroyed my whole joint and fused solid. The doctor did not claim to know what would happen. He said any surgery except fusing my legs straight would be experimental. I said, but then I can't ride horses and climb ladders and cross-country ski and drive tractors. And he was impressed with how fit and active I was. And so he encouraged me to stay active. He didn't shame me. He didn't think I was a failure. He thought I was a survivor. And I felt exonerated from the Christian Science crime of being mortal. I had a history. I wasn't a failure. I'd been a courageous child who outlasted a wicked disease. And I walked out of that hospital as light as a feather. My life didn't instantly get easier because there was no magical solution. My leg was still bent, and there was year after year of hard emotional work and therapy and breakdowns and more therapy and meds. And I limped, and I rode. I had another marriage, another daughter, and another divorce. But gradually, I started to trust myself to be able to care for myself and my kids as a human being and to find help. My leg stayed bent, but I wasn't ashamed of it. I even wore shorts. My second pregnancy finished off my left foot because I'd been walking with it in that position all those years. I had expensive basketball shoes that were about the only thing that I could still walk wearing. I had a bunion. This is another side effect of being treated with prayer as a kid. But because I'd learned to ask for human answers, I could talk to doctors, get opinions, and have surgery. Well-meaning people who want to believe in magic will tell me, but doctors kill people sometimes. But this is an uncertain world we live in. We don't have the ability to know absolutely outside of religion. We do have the responsibility to learn, ask questions, advocate, and make choices. That's the before picture. My doctor said on a scale of 10, it was a 9. This is after. This is what doubt looks like. If you look closely at my good foot, you can see where the nurse had me write no in marker. So there wouldn't be any mistakes. Now, it seems like it would be pretty bad for them to pick the wrong foot. But that is human nature. We hedge our bets. It made me feel concerned and reassured all at the same time. But I call it applied practical uncertainty. I used a wheelchair around the house for a month or two after the surgery, and since I'd spent 6 months in one as a teenager in total denial of what was happening to me, it was very cathartic. I started to write notes of what I remembered about the bone disease. I'd always written a lot, but I had never written a word about what happened. I wrote the notes on 3x5 cards because I was a little fuzzy about the way things had developed. I could rearrange them, I could add to them. It was really, really good for me, and that was how I first started writing about the whole ordeal. I wanted to know my history now that I had one. The bunion surgery bought me some time, but I was still walking with my leg in that same bad position. By now I was in my mid-40s. I'd been walking that way for 30 years. It had damaged my ankle, foot, back, hips, and my other knee. My fused knee could not be replaced when I started really shopping around for a knee doctor. Even the specialist who looked into experimental surgery was not optimistic. And he's the one who called me unique to North America. He also recommended fusing my leg straight. I really didn't want to. While I was considering these options, I decided I'd confront the practitioner that I'd had when I was a teenager. I wasn't hoping for resolution or revelation, but he was now a teacher of Christian Science practitioners, and I just wanted to call him, so I did. He sounded sharp and focused in spite of his age, which had to be in his 80s, and I asked him what he remembered about my case. He said I'd been terribly sick with a bone infection, and I'd been healed. When I asked if I had been healed, he said, well, you were dying, you wouldn't eat, you wouldn't talk, and you weighed half what you were supposed to. And you were healed, you lived. And I said, that was the healing? And he said, well, you didn't die. What would you call it? I said, did you ever think that I should have had medical care? He said, that was entirely up to your parents. He sounded very defensive. I'd never had that impression when I was a kid. I said, if Christian Science heals completely, why do I still have scars, a fused knee, and post-traumatic stress disorder instead of a perfect healing? And he said, your parents took me off your case too soon. And afterwards, I thought of Billy Crystal's line as Miracle Max in The Princess Bride. Don't rush me, Sonny, you rush a miracle man, you get rotten miracles. But I needed to know, so I asked him for the record, would you handle my case the same way if you had to do it all over? This is the teacher of Christian Science practitioners. And he said, of course I would. You were healed, weren't you? Postdoctoral work on doubt and uncertainty is researching your own above-knee amputation. I looked into it partly because it was the worst-case scenario for any knee surgery infection, and partly because I did not want another fused leg. I had lived with the one in that bent position, which was difficult but manageable. I didn't want a straight leg. I wanted a knee that would bend and no more surgeries on my foot and ankle. It took 6 months of reading, talking to amputees, and arguing with orthopedic surgeons. My training in embracing uncertainty helped me to advocate, educate myself, ask questions, look for more opinions, jump through the hoops, and be patient. I was learning that the future is fluid and doubtful in a good way. This picture was taken the night before February 26, 2007. When my left leg was amputated above the knee. 2 months later, I stood upright on 2 straight legs for the first time in 31 years. One of my horsey friends says that that's a new pony smile. And after all the shame I'd worked through about my scarred leg, the prosthesis is fun to wear. And here I am back in the saddle on my mare Laredo. I call these pictures 5 legs, 2 heads, 1 tail. In 2009, I protested the annual meeting at the Mother Church in Boston, Christian Science headquarters. The group was organized by Dr. Seth Asser, the pediatrician who, with Dr. Rita Swan of Child Incorporated, co-wrote Child Fatalities from Religion-Motivated Medical Neglect, which is the definitive study about fatal religious child maltreatment. Remember the story about my aunt's healing of polio paralysis? I told Dr. Asser this story, this family legend, of how my grandmother prayed for my aunt and she was miraculously healed and could walk. He said, "What percentage of polio paralysis cases do you think remain permanent?" Do you have any idea? What would you guess? Throw me some numbers. It's like 10%. Almost all cases of polio paralysis get better on their own, and many spontaneously reverse. And if you're praying at the time, what do you believe? That looks like a miracle. This anecdote was my family's proof that prayer heals. It was one of many such anecdotes. It was a piece of the puzzle that became my religious overdose and led to me getting this nifty fake leg. It's also the kind of anecdotal evidence that Christian Science bases its science on, and then it claims the right to being treated as that it deserves a legal exemption for what is medical neglect of children. Christian Science has toned down its radical reliance talk, and I think of it as a don't ask, don't tell policy about taking your kids to doctors, which is good. But now they want practitioners' bills for prayer reimbursed as health care. The main damage from the Christian Science Church now is that the legal exemptions that they worked so hard to put in place are still on the books in 38 states. Last summer, Herbert and Catherine Scheibel of Pennsylvania were charged with third-degree murder, involuntary manslaughter, child endangerment, and conspiracy when their infant son died of bacterial pneumonia while they prayed. At that time, they were only a few years into 10 years of probation for the death of another child, also from bacterial pneumonia, also while they prayed. The Scheibels are members of the first century gospel church. Other sects, like the Church of the Firstborn and the Followers of Christ, are losing children to untreated diabetes and mothers and babies during childbirth. What we can do is to find out state laws and start talking to people about this. People are outraged when these cases come up, and it seems like every month or so there's another child who's died while somebody was praying, and people don't know that this is legal. We can change these laws. Massachusetts now has one of the best laws, as do Connecticut and Vermont. There's no religious defense or loophole to the criminal code. New Hampshire is pretty bad. You can claim religion caused you to do almost anything to your kid. New York State is coming up for a vote this next year. And is anybody here live in New York State? Come see me if you're interested in getting involved in this. If you see me during lunch, I can get your contact information and help you contact your own, find out who your state assemblyman is. I'm really involved with this. This is our chance to overturn this law. They are redefining the Child Felony Law Welfare Act, and the religious loophole like this is tacked on at the end, and it just gets rubber stamped each time. You can also contact Child Incorporated, which is a nonprofit dedicated to stopping child abuse and neglect related to religion and culture. You can find out all the other states, exactly what the details are, and there are links to videos and articles. This is not a strictly secular issue. This is not humanism versus religion. This is an issue that any responsible parent is going to get behind. The goal is to stop children from suffering and dying. To make prayer without medicine as outdated as bloodletting. That's our goal. These are my girls, Corey and Brock. It's an old picture, and the little one is way taller than I am now, but they don't hold still long enough for me to get recent ones. Their births taught me to question everything that I had staked my life on. If I hadn't let go of my religious certainty and looked critically at all the possibilities, good and bad, right now I'd be in a wheelchair still waiting for healing. There's nothing more important than our kids. When parents, healers, and churches are allowed by law to ask a child to pray through their physical and emotional agony, implying that children can end their own suffering and that doubting the process could compromise the results, this is torture. We can overturn the laws allowing children to suffer both the pain and shame of believing they are incapable of or undeserving of good. Instead of primitive, sometimes fatal religious zeal, we need to offer security, validation, and solutions based on modern science to children, to all children. Thank you. Did you want to do some questions?
Yeah, do we still have time for a couple questions? Yeah, we could do like one or two questions.
Okay.
Great.
Are you,
Did you have a comment you wanted to make about that?
No, but when you talked about your aunt and uncle that didn't consummate their marriage, that's in Christians, that's in Science and Health. She has some really strange ideas about marriage. You should only have intercourse if you're trying for children. And I know of a marriage that broke up because somebody took that literally. So it's an odd one.
Well, I'm always trying for children, just the condom gets in the way. Any other questions?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you're looking at 16 years of therapy here. And asking doctors to cut off your leg when that was the worst thing you could imagine, and you couldn't speak to a doctor for most of your life anyway. So it's amazing what the human mind is capable of believing and then getting over, I guess. And I've always been a really hard worker. But I'm sorry now. Oh, about anger. Yes. For years, my therapist was saying, where's your anger at your parents? And it took a long time. And it came out, and I was angry. I mean, and my emotions were really violent for a long time, not outwardly, but inwardly. I had very self-destructive tendencies for a while. It was all that shame and self-blame. And then I did get angry. And I had to get to that place and then live with that and work through it. And at this point, my parents and I have a good relationship. They're getting quite elderly. My father's in his early 90s. But at this point, and I didn't expect this to happen, and it took a long, long time. It took a long time to get angry. I didn't want to confront them or upset them. I was protecting them. But I finally got there, and I stopped protecting them, and we thrashed things out very well. And I'm really glad. I didn't expect it. I let it go. I said, I don't know what my relationship is going to be with them, but it kind of turned around the last few years, and it was surprising, and I'm really glad while they're still alive. Yeah. I mean, neither one is real happy to go to doctors, but we can get them there now, and they both had surgery. They're not any more difficult than a lot of cranky parents. So.
That's going to be it for questions this time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz. That was amazing. Thank you so much. So that was very powerful. It actually hits me personally because I was born and raised Jehovah's Witness, and they say no to blood. But if you want a fun fact, they say yes to pedophilia.